Hello, and thank you for being here. My name is Assistant Professor Dr. Paula Abola, and I am the Associate Dean and Director of DBA Studies at European International University, Paris. And I'm also pursuing my Doctor of Education at European International University, Paris. Over the last decade, fully online higher education has moved from being a supplementary option to a central mode of delivery for universities worldwide. While this expansion has dramatically increased access for students across regions, life circumstances, and career stages, it has also raised persistent concerns about student disengagement. Today, I will be presenting findings from my cross-sectional study that examined predictors of student disengagement in fully online higher education programs using data from a globally diverse sample of online learners. Importantly, this study moves beyond dropout or withdrawal as outcomes and instead focuses on disengagement as a multidimensional experience that includes psychological strain, instructional experiences, and contextual constraints that often precede formal attrition. When we talk about disengagement in higher education, we often default to measurable outcomes such as course withdrawal or program dropout. However, disengagement is not a binary event. In online environments especially, it often appears gradually through reduced motivation, passive participation, missed deadlines, emotional exhaustion, or cognitive fatigue. These experiences can persist for long periods while students remain formally enrolled, making disengagement particularly difficult to detect in asynchronous online programs. This matters because disengagement has been consistently associated with poor academic performance, lower satisfaction, increased stress, and ultimately higher attrition risk. Understanding disengagement as an early warning condition rather than an endpoint was a central motivation for this study. Prior research suggests that disengagement in online learning is shaped by multiple interacting domains. On the instructional side, course structure, clarity of expectations, instructor presence, and timely feedback are consistently associated with stronger engagement and persistence. At the same time, many online students are adult learners balancing employment, caregiving responsibilities, and time zone differences, factors that can significantly constrain sustained engagement. More recently, attention has turned toward digital fatigue and mental well-being, particularly in context of prolonged screen exposure and continuous online interaction. However, many existing studies examine these factors in isolation or within single institutions. This study sought to examine them simultaneously within a globally distributed online student population. The primary aim of the study was to identify key predictors of student disengagement in fully online higher education programs. Specifically, I asked 3 questions. First, what is the overall level of disengagement among online students? Second, which behavioral, psychological, instructional, and contextual factors are correlated with disengagement? And third, which of these factors independently predict disengagement when considered simultaneously? I hypothesized that psychological and contextual factors, such as digital fatigue and mental well-being, would be stronger predictors than static sociodemographic variables. This study used a cross-sectional correlational design. Data were collected from 140 students enrolled in fully online degree-seeking higher education programs. Participants were recruited internationally through online student communities and academic forums, resulting in representation across multiple continents and institutional contexts. The study received institutional ethics approval and followed Strobe reporting guidelines for observational research. While the design does not permit causal inference, it allows for a detailed examination of patterns and predictors of disengagement across multiple domains. The survey consisted of 2 main components. The first captured detailed sociodemographic and educational background information, including age, employment status, caregiving responsibilities, level of study, prior online learning experience, and learning conditions such as workspace and internet access. The second component was a 46-item disengagement questionnaire, purpose designed for this study and informed by prior literature on engagement, burnout, and digital fatigue. Items assessed multiple disengagement domains, including withdrawal intentions, avoidance behaviors, motivation loss, digital fatigue, mental well-being burden, instructional clarity, instructor presence, feedback quality, sense of community, and contextual challenges such as time zone mismatch. Higher scores indicated greater disengagement. The sample was geographically diverse, with participants residing in North America, Europe, Africa, Asia, South America, and Australia. Over 70% identified as international students enrolled in an institution outside of their home country, highlighting the global reach of fully online programs. Academically, participants spanned undergraduate, master's, and doctoral levels, with most in the early to middle stages of their programs. Importantly, many participants were balancing competing responsibilities. Nearly 1/3 were employed full-time, and over 40% reported caregiving responsibilities. This diversity allowed us to examine disengagement across varied life contexts rather than within a narrow institutional sample. Overall, disengagement levels in the sample were low to moderate, with a mean score of 2.39 on a 5-point scale. Importantly, this suggests that while most students were not overly disengaged or withdrawing, disengagement-related strain was still present. The highest mean scores were observed for mental well-being concerns and digital fatigue, indicating that emotional load and sustained screen exposure were prominent features of students' experiences. Time zone challenges and external demands also showed elevated scores relative to other domains. In contrast, withdrawal intentions and avoidance behaviors were comparatively lower, suggesting that many students were still persisting despite experiencing significant strain. Correlation analyses revealed very strong associations between total disengagement and core behavioral and motivational domains, such as motivation loss, avoidance behaviors, and withdrawal intentions. Psychological factors were also strongly correlated with disengagement. Digital fatigue showed a large effect size, and mental well-being concerns were similarly strongly associated. Instructional and social factors, including course design clarity, instructor presence, feedback quality, and sense of community, demonstrated medium to large correlations with disengagement. These findings suggest that disengagement reflects an interconnected system of experiences rather than a single failing or deficit. A multiple linear regression model was then used to examine which factors independently predicted disengagement when considered together. The overall model explained a substantial proportion of variance, approximately 87%, indicating strong explanatory power. Psychological and contextual factors emerged as the strongest predictors. Higher digital fatigue, greater mental well-being burden, and greater time zone or external demands each independently predicted higher disengagement. Importantly, instructional and social factors remain significant even after controlling for these variables. Challenges related to course design, instructor presence, feedback quality, and sense of community all independently contributed to disengagement levels. Among background characteristics, full-time employment predicted higher disengagement, while older age predicted lower disengagement. This pattern suggests that disengagement is shaped more by lived learning conditions than by static sociodemographic characteristics. Taken together, these findings reinforce the idea that disengagement in fully online higher education is a multidimensional phenomenon. Psychological strain, particularly digital fatigue and mental well-being burden, appears central to disengagement experiences even when students remain enrolled. At the same time, instructional quality and social connection continue to play a critical role. Clear structure, visible instructor presence, meaningful feedback, and a sense of community are not optional enhancements, but they remain core engagement support. Importantly, disengagement can exist long before dropout occurs, highlighting the need for earlier detection and intervention. These findings have several practical implications for institutions and educators. First, efforts to reduce disengagement must extend beyond course design to include strategies that address digital fatigue and mental well-being, such as flexible deadlines, reduced unnecessary screen time, and proactive support resources. Second, globally distributed programs should consider time zone flexibility and workload alignment as equity issues, not merely logistical concerns. Third, instructor presence and feedback remain powerful protective factors against disengagement and should be institutionally supported rather than left to individual effort. Finally, institutions should move beyond retention-only metrics and incorporate experiential indicators of disengagement into quality assurance processes. As with all research, this study has limitations. The cross-sectional design limits causal inference, and self-reported measures may introduce response bias. While the sample was globally diverse, it may not fully represent all online higher education contexts. Future research should adopt longitudinal designs to examine disengagement trajectories over time, as well as intervention-based studies to test strategies aimed at reducing digital fatigue and support well-being. Qualitative research could also provide deeper insights into students' lived experiences of disengagement and then re-engagement. In conclusion, this study demonstrates that student disengagement in fully online higher education is best understood as complex, multidimensional experience shaped by psychological strain, instructional practices, and contextual constraints. Psychological and contextual factors, particularly digital fatigue, mental well-being burden, and external demands, emerged as the strongest predictors of disengagement, while instructional and social factors remained independently influential. These findings highlight the importance of addressing disengagement proactively before it manifests as withdrawal, and of designing online education not just for efficiency and scalability, but for the realities of human attention, well-being, and lived experience. Thank you very much for joining my presentation. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me to my email address. Thank you.